Hey there, I'm Marlise, and I serve on the vestry and I run the communications team. If this is your first time on our channel, welcome. Please take a moment and subscribe. We post sermons and other content here every week. If you've been hanging out on our channel for a while, maybe take a moment and fill out our online Connect card. That lets me know that you're here and we can reach back out to you. Now enjoy the message.
This past Wednesday was All Saints' Day, which means that Tuesday was Halloween. You probably know this, that Halloween is a contraction of the Old English All Hallows' Eve, Halloween, and All Hallows is All Saints. Sort of like we say in the Lord's Prayer, hallowed be thy name, holy be your name. And then Thursday was All Souls' Day. So All Saints' Day, we think began in the 5th century in Rome, in a place called the Pantheon, where all the gods were worshipped. And then the Pantheon becomes not a pagan temple, but a Christian church. And there they first celebrate all saints. And they're particularly thinking about the special saints, the heroes of the faith. In the 5th century, they're especially thinking about the martyrs, the people who had given their lives for this thing we call Christianity, before Christianity was legal. But after a day celebrating the heroes of the faith, All Souls' Day is just what it sounds like, all souls. It's for the rest of us. Those of us who aren't heroes of the faith, but we live our faith quietly wherever and whenever we are. And so this week, with Halloween and All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, it's a time when we are confronted with the reality that all that we see is not all that there is. That this is lovely, but there is more than just this. All Saints' Day can be a time of great hope. It can also be a time that is hard because we are remembering the people who we love. We know their faces better than we know the back of our hand. If we heard their voice, like in the narthex, we would immediately know it was them, but they are not with us any longer. The words out of the prayer book service for a funeral says that in death, life is changed, not ended. It also says that we mourn, but we mourn as those not without hope. And so this time is to remember that the people that we are separated from, are they with God? Yeah? Okay, thank you. We're a little unsure. Yes. Are we with God? Yes. Thank you. So if they're with God and we're with God, we are not together. We're not going to be celebrating Thanksgiving or Christmas or birthdays or all of those things together, but in somehow we are united in the presence of God, that God holds their hand and God holds our hand at the same time. And there is great promise and hope and comfort in that. But that doesn't mean that we don't mourn and grieve. Jesus mourned. Jesus came upon the tomb that his friend Lazarus had just been laid in. He knew what he was going to do in a few moments, which was raise him from the dead. But before he does that, he weeps. He mourns. Because mourning is normal. And then he calls him out of the tomb. This past summer, there was a group of us from St. Mark's who gathered throughout the summer and then again in early September reading a book that I've talked about before, Megan Devine's book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And it is a book about grief. It is a book for people who are grieving. Like if someone were to go through a horrific loss, this might be a book that you could hand them. There are also sections of the book where the author quite bluntly says, hand this to your friends because they need to know this, how to be with you. Every session that we had this summer, I began with the words of Jesus that we heard in this morning's gospel lesson. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And I reminded us that we usually read that as those who mourn will be comforted by God, which is true, but how does God comfort most often is he sends us. And so when we are a comfort to those who mourn, we are in a sense fulfilling one of the Beatitudes that Jesus proclaimed in the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. I took copious notes in our meetings and copious notes at our last meeting where we talked about what we might want to do with all that we learned and discussed. And there was a definite, palpable sense that the group wanted to share with the larger community what we talked about and what we learned. And so without any names attached to any statements, I'm going to share a little bit of what we talked about. We talked about how grief comes in many different forms. Sometimes it is the loss of someone who is deeply beloved to us. Sometimes it's the loss of health. Sometimes it's the loss of youth. Sometimes it's the loss of home, or the loss of a job, or the loss of a beloved pet. These are all legitimate things to grieve over. They should all be honored as things to be grieved. But they are not all the same. There are some griefs that we go through, some losses that change us forever, because not only do we lose this person or this thing, but we lose all of the hopes and the dreams that we had wrapped up in them. And so that's the kind of grief I want to speak about this morning, and in the sense that how we can be with people who are grieving in that way. Because there are things that we can do and say that are helpful, and there are things that we can say and do that are hurtful, even though we don't intend them to be hurtful. There was an aspect of our gatherings this summer where there was a little catharsis, where we went through some of the horrifically head-shaking things that people had said to us in our group, trying to be helpful, but not so much. Almost all of the hurtful things that we say or do when someone is in deep mourning stems from a seeing grief and mourning as a problem that needs to be fixed, as a thing that needs to be gone through and gotten over very quickly, as if grief is not normal and we just want to get people back to normal right away. Grief and mourning is thoroughly natural and normal. Just because it is normal to grieve does not mean that there is a normal way to grieve. There is no timetable. There is, despite what we all learned in Psychology 101, and a cycle of grief. There is no strict cycle of grief where you do step A and you do step B and then you're all done. But it's been a year already, or 2 years, or 5 years, whatever you want to add in there. It's been a year already. Shouldn't you be back to normal by now? Do you see the implicit judgment of that statement, that it should be over as soon as possible? There's even a more implicit and subtle selfishness to that statement. For why do I want the person just to get over it? But because being around them is uncomfortable for me. If they would just get back to normal, then I could get back to normal being with them. I want it to be fixed. When a person is grieving, there is nothing to fix because grief cannot be fixed. It can only be gone through. And I think in some ways that should be a huge weight off. There are no perfect words to say. There is no combination of words that is going to take away someone's grief. And so we can just take that burden and put it down. If you've ever stood in the long line at a funeral home, inching closer and closer to the family and wondering, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? There's nothing you can say that's going to take away their pain. If you've ever seen someone recently after they suffered a loss at the grocery store or at church and thought, oh my gosh, what do I say? There is no words that you can say that will make it better. In fact, because there are no words, you could just be with them. You could just offer, if appropriate, a small hug. You could call them up and just sit on the phone in silence. There's a thing that we learn in seminary called the ministry of presence. But they don't teach us the words to say either. They invite us to go and sit with people who are grieving, and just by our presence, we are offering love and comfort. Grief is an individual journey. There are no two griefs that are the same. They might be similar, but even if your grief is similar, like I lost fill in the blank and you lost the same fill in the blank, the situations are still different. The relationships were different. The tragedies, the losses were different. I'm different. You're different. There are no two exact same griefs. When we are with people who are grieving intensely, we should know that grief affects how we think. It affects our cognition. It affects our memory. It affects our sleep. There is a fog that descends where you just can't think clearly, where time moves differently. Our brains are trying to rewire themselves to a life that we couldn't previously imagine and we certainly didn't want or ask for. We aren't going back to the life as it was when it was normal. We are going towards a new life that we didn't want. And so our brain is working to wrap itself around and remap. So we want to help, and we certainly don't want to hurt. So what don't we do? And as I said, we did spend some time laughing and crying over the things that were said that probably shouldn't have been. Don't make it about yourself. You don't swoop in with advice and a plan. You don't swoop in with a plan to fix the person. You don't tell them that you know what they're going through, because you don't. You don't ask questions and invite conversation that makes someone walk through the worst day of their life unless they invite you to have that conversation. You don't minimize the loss, telling one day they'll be over it. You lost X, you'll get another X. Our group spent a long time trying to define the murky difference between acknowledging the loss and making it about ourselves. And some of this is murky. There is no simple answer to this. Some of it depends on you knowing the other person and you knowing your relationship with them. There is a difference, though, between how are you and how are you. Same words, totally different energy. If I had to define where things go off the track with, how are you? It's the trapping the person into responding. In a simple, hey, how are you? The person could just say, oh, I'm fine, I'm off for coffee, and not get into the thing that they don't want to get into. If you ask, how are you? You've trapped them either into responding or seeming rude by not responding. In the book and in our discussions, we kept coming back to acknowledgement as being key. You let them know by your words and actions that they are not forgotten, that they are thought of, without giving them a job to do in talking to you or helping you out. They might be in a place where a deep conversation would be very helpful, but they might not. And that varies not only day by day, but moment by moment. Like right now, I might be open to talking about it, but in a moment or two, I might not be. Don't make the decision for them that they have to talk about this thing. You can open a door without forcing them to walk through it. And walking with people in deep mourning really is a lot of the time just that. It's opening a door, for they might want to lurk in the doorway and talk a little bit. They might not ever have that talk with you for whatever reason, and that's okay. You've opened a door, and that is its own form of comfort and love. You could say things like, do you want company? Do you need something done? Is there some way that I can help you? Quick visits, with an emphasis on quick. Shoveling their steps when it snows, or offering to walk their dog every once in a while. Each person is going to be different, and each person is going to have different needs, and each person will have days that are better than others, and you just never know. Comforting the mourning means acknowledging, it means presence, and it means opening the door. It means accepting them right where they are at in that moment. Just like the title of the book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay. It means knowing when you've overstepped a bound or overstayed a welcome. It means trying to find that line between just enough and too much. It means giving up control and the need to fix it. Our little group went back and forth on whether to offer a workshop or what to do with this experience that we all had reading this book together and sharing our lives together. The one thing that was unanimous was that we recommended this book. And there are several members of the group that have made themselves available to talk to others, should you want that, knowing that by asking them to talk, you will not be facing someone who is trying to fix you. This is not all there is. There is more. In death, life is changed, not ended. But in death, our lives change. And so we mourn, not as those without hope, but we mourn, and sometimes we crack the door and mourn together. Amen.